A very good morning to you all. Welcome back to our online lecture series. And after two exciting talks yesterday, we are back with two new speakers today. And I am extremely glad to introduce my friend. She's Dr. Lois Joss. She's from Kerala. So she will talk, and let me introduce her first. She is currently working as an assistant professor on government contract in Ayyappa College, which is affiliated to University of Kerala. She, after pursuing her masters in English and comparative literature, did her research in folktales and its contextual studies. The study was awarded PhD from Pondicherry Central University. She is a very good scholar. She has published many papers. She has 6 publications to her credit, and she has presented many papers in both national and international conferences. So I know Lois personally, and she's a very good speaker, and I am quite sure she will glue you to the screen. And today she will talk on the topic Eliot and his sense of history, tradition, and talent, reading, tradition, and individual talent. So that's all for the introduction. Over to Lois for the lecture.
Thank you, Anindya. Good morning. It's with my joy and happiness I'm with you today morning. At the outset, I thank the organizers of the Department of English, KKU College, and English Literature Briefs for arranging classes for degree students, especially my dear friend Dr. Anindya and his whole team behind him. So when Anindya messaged me about giving a lecture for his students, I grabbed the opportunity without much thinking. But then I had some messages with him wondering on what I should speak to you. I finally chose Eliot, neither because I'm an authority on Eliot, nor he is my favorite author. In fact, I found a little hard to understand him in my college days. Even today also, and I guess same may be the case with many of you. So I thought of sharing my way of studying and understanding of Eliot and his critical pronunciations. And I hope that will help you some way. So T.S. Eliot, Thomas Stearns Eliot. He was born in 1888 in the 19th century. He was an American British poet, essayist, a critic, publisher, playwright, and an editor. He was also under the field of banking, so he was a financier. He was a man born of elite class. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri, in a Boston Brahmin family. And this Boston Brahmin family is associated mostly with aristocratic clubs like Knickerbocker, Somerset, or Metropolitan. Universities like Harvard. They always followed the traditional costumes and clothings. And it was the period in the 19th century, the 18th and 19th century, there's a trend that was coming up in America and France, where the old colonialist and feudalist regimes are overthrown by the middle class. But moving against that trend, Eliot moved out of America and he came to England. And England in the 19th century was the biggest colonial power, the world's first industrialist capitalist nation. In 1914, during the First World War, he came to UK and he settled there. He became the British citizen in 1927, renouncing American citizenship. Does all this matter when we are discussing about his writing? Yeah, I just want to say that he was an elitist in all aspects, and that matters a lot. Because that concept, that elitism in him, that upper social class in him, helped him a lot to get celebrated or fetched him the fame which he has now. The Nobel Prize too. More than most of his contemporaries like C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, he was celebrated. But he was not a poet of the common man. He was not appreciated by the common man. People who celebrated him seldom read his works. Even today, he is not widely read outside the universities. One of the earliest critics who wrote about Eliot remarked that his poetry is irrational, I quote, irrational, incomprehensible, and a magnificent puzzle. unquote. Now, that is exactly what he wanted. His poetry should feel irrational, incomprehensible, and a magnificent puzzle to the whole lot of the world. He chose this mode of writing deliberately. To understand this deliberate stance, why he did that, why he has to make his writing pretty difficult. Throughout his essays of critical pronunciation, he keeps speaking about objectivity, that you should not know about others' past to understand what he's trying to say. But to understand his stance, we need to understand the period he was writing, the period into which he was born to. So let's look apart a little history from Terry Eagleton. So what I understood this is from Terry Eagleton's introduction to literary theory. In this, he says that till the 18th century, literature does not confine to the idea of literature as how we perceive it today, how we understand it today. For us today, literature is something more of creative, imaginative, something which helps us to understand, something which helps us to move on the wings of the fancy. But it was not that way it was understood by the England of 18th century. It was a whole body of valued writing in society, ranging from philosophy, history, letters, essays, and poems. It's a whole body of valued writing. And who valued it? A particular class must value it. It was qualified as literature when it pleased the values of a particular social class, the upper class. It was in the 19th century the idea of literature began to confine to the idea of creative or imaginative writing. The idea of aesthetics and beauty was added to it during the period of Coleridge and the critics during his time and after him. So during the Romantic period, literature became virtually synonymous with the imaginative writing. It was equated with that. And when I say imaginative writing, it carried two ideas. It carried the idea of fictitious, something not true, as well as visionary or inventive. So that was the period where poets were considered as prophets. Poets could read something beyond the, the what they are seeing, the contemporary, the temporal age. Most of the romantics, as we know, were part of the political movements. So they wanted to change the existing order and they went against the capitalist regimes. Terry Eagleton says this romantics used imagination as a political force and literature as an alternative ideology. They just wanted to create a just society where everything is equal, where everything is free. So this idea of equality, fraternity, liberty, in fact, inverted the old nature of England, the old organic England that obeyed an authority, and it detached the England from literature from its history or the traditional mode. Since the Romantics used art as a medium against the ruling class, the major effect was that their art was dismissed in the market. It was not bought by the common man. People never bothered about it. The industrial society made a new working class. You know the story of this man who works day and night because a new working class emerged. And they never had time to appreciate art. So, you know the movie of Charlie Chaplin, right? Who works 24/7. And it was much later in the 19th century, there's a gap formed from the common man and the artist or the poets. So it was much later in the 19th century, the gap between the poets and the working class was narrowed, it was little smooth towards the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century. So on one side, this happened. Literature moved away from its historic values, concept, and the traditional mode of delivering it to the people, and then there was a big gap formed in the 19th century, towards the 18th century and 19th century, from the Augustine. On the other hand, this 19th century was also called as the age of science. So in 1800s and 1900s, we can see a number of students studying science subject like physics, chemistry, and they are moving on to Germany, France, Italy, writing a lot of papers, publishing it. They are believing in the power of science and the technologies it could produce. Almost all the universities paid attention to such experiments and studies. And the tutors, they were not professors, they were not called as professors or teachers. The tutors who taught the students charged heavy fees. Students of the middle class could not afford the fees. They started studying English literature. They started studying humanitarian subjects. So the English was considered as a subject of the middle class or the lower class as an education or in the academic field, and for the women, people who belong to the high class studied science. So science got an upper hand in the society. So English was not a subject of academics pursued by any class, and science took the center. Lewis says it was the period in his book called Abolition of Man, the man was moved out of the center. The culture, the religion, it was not discussed anymore. So science took the center. Your body became a system. This happened on the other side. So at both sides, literature was moved out of the society. However, during the period of First World War, that's like 1914, British capitalism created a need for the sense of national mission and nationalism, an identity in them. There occurred a need to know the tradition because their capitalism was threatened by the colonial their colonies. They need to say that they are culturally superior. So the tradition, which was seldom discussed till then, has to be discussed now again. And that sense of nationality cannot be created by the science subject, which was only 100 years old or less than that. But the idea of the English, we are part of a nation, could be created by literature. Because English had national poets like Milton or Shakespeare, Chaucer for that case. So therefore, the educational bodies in the teaching of English are more attached with the nostalgic back references to the organic, to bring back the organic community of Elizabethan age. And there was a purposeful bringing back of literature. So you can see English literature was even included as part of the civil service examination during the Victorian period. All what they were trying to display was their cultural superiority. Eliot, with his superior mindset, could easily achieve this point. That's why I said in the beginning that Eliot was born of an elite class and he kept following it. So English slowly became the center of all subjects in major universities, superior to law, science, politics, philosophy, and history. Eliot, with great labor, made sure that his writings are easily understood by all. It is not something for everyone. It is not something for the lower class of the society, and the people should look at it and say, wow, it's something so great, I can create it. He wrote for a small audience. Eliot, the man of upper class, stood for the right wing authoritarianism. He didn't like the middle class liberalism propagated by the 18th century. In fact, he himself describes in the preface to Volume 4 Lancelot and Andrews as his beliefs are very classical in literature, royalist in politics, Anglo Catholic in religion. And according to him, the men and women must sacrifice their individual personalities. Your individuality does not matter here. You should be impersonal. That idea is throughout his poem, his critical pronunciation. Because I have given a necessary background to understand Eliot and the reason why he talks about tradition. He is not the first person to talk about tradition, but he is the one who defended it in the best way. Eliot as a critic is rebellious, and as a poet, he is a revolutionary. He is rebellious because he is writing against the existing order. Now, this is say the traditional and individual talent is about explaining his way of impersonal theory of poetry. It is divided into two major parts and a conclusion. Now, he explains his theory of impersonality or impersonal theory of poetry by way of two methods. The whole essay, if you want to put it in one word, is about a relationship. I'm coming to the essay now. So it's all about a relationship. Whose relationship? It's about a poem's relationship, a work of art's relationship, a work of art's relationship one with the work of art's written before it. Two, a work of art's relationship or a poem's relationship with the author or the poet. So the whole essay is about relationship. It's about a poem is in the middle, and then its relationship with the other poems written before it and its relationship with the author. That's it. So the first part, it discusses about its relationship with the other poems. It discusses the tradition. Now, what do you mean by tradition? The term tradition means a belief, a custom. Like this is the lexical meaning, the meaning which you find in a dictionary. It's a belief or a custom or way of doing something that had existed for a very long time among a particular group of people. But when Eliot says that you need to follow tradition, the age before him, the 18th century, is moving away from the concept of literature, followed till the 17th century. And the audience of Victorian era seldom criticized it. French people are more into criticism and they find pride in that. Okay, we are not criticizing because we have something, imagination to create. People are more into imagination at that age. And even if someone the critics of this period were bothered to find the individual elements in these works. They praised the writers who did not resemble anyone else, and they criticized if your work resembled any classical writer. Okay, we all love to hear something new, read something new, want to see something new, and not a similar one. We don't want to see one more painting just like what Da Vinci did or Michelangelo did. But Eliot says tradition is not that blind following of your predecessor, it got a wider significance. When you critique someone saying that he resembles someone else and he is not he is good because he is not like someone else. It's just like saying Milton is good because he is not like Donne, he is not like Herbert. You are good because you are not like your sister. Does that make sense? That poet is good because he is not writing like the other writer. That is what Eliot calls as prejudice. For example, when you hear a music, you tear it into different pieces and you try to examine every line, every bit of it, to see to which music it resembles. Then you are not going to enjoy it. You are prejudiced. You approach with that musician with prejudice. It is here Eliot makes his first pronunciation that no poet, no artist of any art has his complete meaning alone. That's his first point. No poet, no artist of any art has his complete meaning alone. Now, Eliot is not saying that plagiarism or copying is okay. No, he discourages copying. He's not for that. But he says that we cannot appreciate a work of art when it is entirely different from other work of arts, when it is something new, when it is something strange. Because a work of art cannot exist when it is different from its predecessors. It is just that it does not have a platform. You build a big house and you don't have a platform, it cannot stand. So according to him, Not only the best, but the most individual part of his work asserts the work of art by his predecessors, and that is not copying. He himself says that if a writer is copying from a predecessor, he or she should be discouraged from that act because that is not tradition. And then what is tradition for Eliot? Throughout the essay, I have picked some terms which is used as synonymous to tradition in this essay by Eliot. Like one, historical sense. Two, pastness of past. Three, he uses the term past and present, or the present continuous today. Four, he uses the term timeless and temporal. Five, existing and new. Six, mind of Europe. Seven, the entire literary world. Eight, the existing order of literature. Literature from Homer to present. Nine, simultaneous order. 11, all the works written before this work of art. All this is, these are some different terms used by Eliot just to represent what he meant by tradition. I'll come back to this. Now, I was saying about his critical pronunciation, the first one, no poet, no artist can make a complete meaning alone. Then what makes the meaning? It is a historical sense. Let me pull in an example. You might have already studied that language is arbitrary, that the subject and the object is not directly related. My name is Lois, and if my parents had called me like Divya or Lisha in my when I was child, I would have been known by that name, and that name has no connection with what I am, my identity. That is what we call the language is arbitrary. So imagine now with this idea that you are walking in a garden and you saw a snake. You have this idea that the name snake is nowhere connected to that animal, that reptile. And then you cry out saying that, Amma, oh Papa, come first. This fish is coming to bite me. Does it help? No, I'm pulling in a silly example, I know, but then that will help you to understand like this. It won't help calling a snake fish because the communication failed. The reptile has been registered or coded as snake in everyone else's mind, and fish got a different image. All of a sudden, you change it. You change the image. You pull in a new image. You pull in a strange image. You cannot create a meaning. You fail. That meaning is coded into that word for years. That word has no the direct connection with the object. I agree with that. But that meaning has been coded into that object for a long period of time, for years. So if you don't conform to that order, that environment, your communication fails. Similar is the case with the poet. He cannot create a meaning of his own. He needs to align with the images, the symbols or forms used by his predecessors to communicate the purpose. I hope I'm making some sense to you. Now, the poet has to be in such an environment to create the meaning, the environment created by the past authors. And both the timeless and temporal together makes an artist traditional, or I would say rational. This is achieved by historical sense. Now, historical sense is very much different from historical facts. A person, okay, I want to know about the history so that there will be some kind of tradition in me. And then he sits and studies for another 25 years, reads all the books, a work of art for 25 years, and then try to write something, a new work. It doesn't help you. That work of art will not have an emotion. Let me put it in a simple term. Imagine that you have an orange in your hand. You start explaining about the orange, its color, its composition, how that orange falls down from a tree, the gravitational force, or the carbohydrate content, the vitamin, it states everything. You know how to write an essay, but that doesn't bring the sense of orange in. So historical facts is like that. You know a lot of things about orange, but you don't have the sense. So historical sense is entirely different from historical facts. It does not bring to you the sense of orange. You will get that sense only when you taste it. Only when you have the idea of your predecessors, their images, the way they made it, the way it has reached till now. Only when it is entered in your blood and veins, you have that sense in you. So that is what historical sense. Secondly, he tries to explain the term tradition by another idea, saying that the idea of past that is altered by the present and the present that is directed by the past. Two things. The past is altered by the present and the present is directed by the past. So it is into this concept that he brings into all other terms which I told earlier, which I rendered earlier, like the pastness of the past, the entire literary world, the mind of Europe, the existing and the new simultaneous order. Now, what does this mean? Past altered by the present. Do you think that what I do today can change something in the past? We always think that past is something fixed, right? We cannot make any change to it. But Eliot says you can change the past. You can alter the past by a present work of art. Think, imagine like you have a group of friends and sitting in a very big circle. And then someone new comes to that surrounding. And the one who came is a friend of your friend of the friend who is sitting in the circle. So suddenly what will you do? You will adjust yourself so that the new friend can be accommodated into the circle. So there was a past order, a past existing feature, and it was complete. It was a complete circle. But when a new work of art came, and when you realize that it is your friend or it your friend's friend, he looked like you, somewhat similar to your concept, you admitted it into your circle. The present is altered a bit, right? Sorry, the past is altered a bit to make a new order. This is what he makes by the tradition. He means by the tradition. And imagine that the new person who came is a complete stranger or your enemy. You will not admit that person. If you out of a blue, if you're trying to make something strange idea, that work of art will be rejected. Till a new work of art is produced, there exists an order, just like the circle of friends are sitting together. That is the past order. Only when the new work of art has aligned with the existing order, has meaning with the existing order, which is the historical sense, then the work of art is accepted or else it is rejected. The existing order was complete in itself. But when a new work of art arrives and it is found that it got some alignment with them, the whole order is slightly changed. So the relations, proportions, values of each work of art towards the whole meaning has readjusted. That's why when a new work of art comes in, new theory comes in, I guess that we go back to the old writers and read something new into it. I'll give you one more example. Think about the school uniforms. Now think about the school uniforms from your father's time and your time. There was an order, right? In the father's time, there has been a lot of changes, but there was an order. Now your father was wearing maybe a shirt and a pant. The shirt was not in check, and the girls might have wore a shirt and a long skirt. After some period of time, in course of time, a new uniform came. The structure didn't change. They also followed the same shirt and pant, but they introduced a belt. And after a period of time, there was time. All these are built on the same structure. The art never changes. He keeps saying that the art never improves. It is just the material that is changed, and the material is picked up from your surroundings. So the new uniform, which has the recent uniform, which has embroidered the emblem of school on the shirt, a colored collar, it is included or it is joined to that old existing order. And every time that older person sees, okay, this resembles something like me, come in, it welcomes. Just like the work of art comes in, it adjusts, it admits into it that tradition. But what if a new school comes in and saying that from tomorrow onwards, we have to wear the dress of the king in ballet dance forms, right? Let's come wearing like that, and will that uniform be admitted? It won't be admitted to the past order. It won't be admitted to the tradition. It will be rejected. Similar as the writing. Before Shakespeare, there was drama. We had an existing order of the plays like tragedy, comedy, revenge plays. And when Shakespeare wrote something like tragic comedy, we accepted it. Or rather, the tradition accepted it because it was just a progression from his tradition and not something against them. When Milton writes an epic, it is a commentary on the Virgil or a Dante who wrote before that. Of course, there is progression, but there are changes of but the idea of epic comes from them. And when Wordsworth writes an epic, it is a commentary on Milton, and from there it is a commentary on Virgil and Dante. Wordsworth cannot say that I am writing against Milton. Now, the comparison is not judging them, not judging the author to amputate them, to say that one is better and the other one is worse. It just marks the progression of the author, progression of that poetry from one tradition till today. So, usually we say, or a writer says his work is better than his predecessors and claim the individuality. But the writer coming after us will also say the same thing that they are better. And where did they build it? The order or the tradition where you are a part. Imagine that you are making a work of art and all your predecessors are starting around you just like you are in a race and the people are trying to cheer you. You're standing in a race and everyone is trying to cheer you. They will cheer for you only if you are a friend of them. Otherwise, they won't cheer for you. Just like the same thing, the authors are standing around you to see whether this work of art resembles us. As simple as that. The novelty, the individuality, or the strange ideas that is different from the tradition is not accepted. And a work of art is admitted to the existing order only if it fulfills two qualities. One, it needs to be complex. Two, it requires immense concentration. So we can consider the mind of the poet is like a smithy where a lot of unrelated materials are concentrated. He goes around, he got a lot of emotions or feelings that concentrated in his mind, and he will synthesize it to a complex product. The great work of art demands admission because of its greatness, not because it follows the tradition of its predecessor blindly. And this greatness is coming from this complexity and the immense concentration in which it is produced. You cannot condemn Eliot reading The Wasteland and say that he quotes from Chaucer. He's bringing a lot of quotations from here and there. He quotes from Chaucer to say April is the cruelest month, or from Shakespearean lines in Tempest to say to make his drowning eyes like pearl. The whole poem is more complex, more connected. You have a lot of frames. You start with April, a season, and then you have Madame Saurashtra or the Hyacinth Girl or a burial ground. But every single frame is connected back to the one idea. You will see a Madame Saurashtra who is a prophet, but she is having a very bad cold, very bad cough. She can't do the she can't prophesy, she can't help the people. April is the cruelest month, she can't do her work. You'll see a burial ground, the deads are buried there, dead bodies are buried there, but it has denied the right of decay. Again, April is the cruelest month. It is not able to do the spring. So every single frame which is written in this concept in the wasteland brings back this idea that it is waste. Such a complex idea, such an immense concentration make that work a great. So the whole point is not actually bringing in a lot of quotations from here and there to show that he is traditional, but it is so complex and it is synthesized in immense concentration. So tradition, it is not old-fashioned, it is not appreciation of the particular period, it is not appreciating a few authors before you, it is not giving preference to a few forms, it is not plagiarism. Instead, it means the entire mind of Europe, the entire literary world that includes the moment of writing, then from the Homer till the moment of writing the new work of art. And if a work of art is aligned with the traditional authors, then it alters the past, which we already studied. And such a great work of art can be produced only when you have historical sense. Only when you have a historical sense, your tradition, only when you know the tradition, you can write a great work of art. That is, the present is directed by the past. So, according to Eliot, the poet has to surrender himself to the tradition to create a great work of art. He has to surrender himself to the tradition. He needs to develop his consciousness of past, and that is the only way he can ensure his progress. A person who does not want to study cannot grow or exhibit a progression. This is a self sacrifice. The end product will not have your emotion, but the work has the artistic emotion. This is the second part of his essay, where he makes it the individual talent, the impersonality of the poetry, where the poet, the relationship of the poem with the author. The author is just like an agent. He himself brings in an example where two gases are brought into a vessel, like sulfur dioxide and oxygen, and they are synthesized under immense pressure, and a shred of platinum is put into it, and you get the sulfuric acid. Now, the presence of platinum actually helped to make the new product, but the end product has no trace of the platinum, the catalyst, just like the artist. The point is like that. Let me bring in two examples here. I'm coming to the end of my lecture. An oyster, you know the what an oyster is that lies under the sea water. And one fine morning, a small bit of sand enters into its body. The whole soft meat inside the oyster get troubled, right? Just like a small sand enters into your eye. It tries its best to put it outside, but it cannot. And it sacrifices itself or suffers a lot to make a covering, to make a change to that the sand, that foreign particle that entered inside him. The end product is pearl. You take that pearl out of the oyster, keep it in a market. No one asks you from which oyster you took that pearl, or the pearl belongs to which oyster. No one asks you. Nor the oyster makes any imprint on it to say that, hey, this pearl is mine. A work of art should be like that. The author has to put in a great pressure, but it has no imprint on the end product, the work of art. It is complex. It is synthesized under the immense concentration, but the end product should has its emotion. Let me bring in a very simple example. You might have seen hen, right? It goes around your house, eat a lot of incongruent things, unrelated things, and they get synthesized in its body, and then hence lays an egg. You take the egg and see, you cannot differentiate which egg is laid by which hen. No one asks it. The egg does not exhibit any suffering that the hen went through instead of, but the egg has its emotion. So, no poet can make a complete meaning. I'm coming back to the first statement. Imagine a work of art like a circle. Half of it is already tradition. It is on that tradition that he's going to build his new work of art. So that part does not belong to him. The other half has a lot of ingredients like personality, emotion, material, a lot of synthesis is happening, complexities, immense concentration, and all this makes the other half. The writer is standing on a platform of tradition. His mind has absorbed a lot of incongruent and complex materials. It is then synthesized under the immense concentration, aligned with the tradition, and the end product has its emotion. The author's personality is not expressed unlike what the romanticist said. That is, we need not know the background of the author to appreciate his poem. Now, this is what new critics say in the 20th century, and Eliot is associated with that book. So you take the poem Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Even, even when you don't know the background of Robert Frost or the emotion which he went through, that is not necessary. When you read the poem, it should create some kind of emotion in you. That is what he calls as artistic emotion. So even when you don't know the background of the artistic, the emotion, the personal emotion the author went through, you can enjoy the poem. The personal issues of the author, you can still enjoy the poem. Whereas in the poems of the Romantic age are mostly the expressions of the poet's personality. But if you look at the bust poems of the Wordsworth, they are the ones that resembles his predecessors, not what confines to his theories. So let me conclude my class or lecture. A poet whose writing must follow the tradition. And the tradition means historical sense. Historical sense is obtained by a great labor. It includes the entire mind of Europe, the existing order. It's a simultaneous order. And unless a work of art is in tune with that tradition, that past, it is not admitted into the literary tradition. When you construct a building, if the platform is not so strong, it doesn't matter how beautiful or how much money you have put in it, the building will collapse. If the new work of art is not built on the tradition, it cannot stand. It will fall down. It is rejected. It is not a work of art for timeless. It's not a classical work. Secondly, a work of art is good only when it is complex and it is synthesized under immense concentration. It should also make sure that the end product will have artistic emotion and the artist should not express himself. He must develop his consciousness to that level. Therefore, he makes another critical pronunciation in the second part. It says that the honest criticism should be directed towards the work of art and not the author, because it is not the author that matters. It is the work of art that matters. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you so much, Lois. It was an excellent presentation, I must say, and you have lucidly dealt so many aspects. We have talked about the background. We have talked about Asia in detail, and we have talked about various aspects from taking example from life. And I'm quite sure there are many questions from the audiences. So let us move to that question answer session. Uh, I will put the question on the screen, and you may answer those. Is it okay?
Yeah, I guess
Okay.
so.
So the first, so this is your first question.
Eliot was writing during the modern times. Then the how the war poetry fits his historical sense of the poet. And if it fits, then do you think the war poet fits his category of traditional writer? Okay, the basic idea is the emotion the art creates. Uh, the art never improves. The situation changes. The material into which an art is made, or the materials taken to make an art differs. Let's come back to the example of the hen itself. The first hen who might have laid the egg eaten might have eaten a lot of the things that are available at that point of time. The egg which is around you will get an artificial food right in this age. It also lays an egg. So the material can differ, but the way he writes, the images he picks up, Even if you look at this poem Wasteland, which is written after the First World War, you can say it's a war poetry or it's actually the impact of the war. He is looking into the England which is created after the war and says that this is entirely wasteland, nothing is going to happen in this. There's no life, there is no hope. But the way he creates it, that the complexity that is brought into that poem is brought from a lot of historical sense. He bring in the idea of Chaucer's April, he bring in the idea of Madame Sosostris, he bring in the idea of burial ground or tempest. He's using all those images that has been built till then in the literature to communicate his idea, to communicate his emotion. In this chapter itself, it says that it is the fusion that counts. You have a lot of emotions, you have a lot of materials around you, and your mind is just like a vessel into which that emotions are poured in, and you have to synthesize it. When you synthesize it to make a new work of art, you cannot do it in a vacuum. You have to use the method used by the historical things. So, if the war poets is finding a new method of explaining it, if they are not confining to the images or the ideas brought by his predecessors, that won't be a good work of art. So I guess I am making some sense to you.
Yes. So this is your next question. Uh, this is by Dr. Shomol Ghosh.
According to T.S. Eliot, what is the role of individual talent in the creative process of a poet and how this can be found in Eliot's own writing? That's very good question. Like, if without an individual talent, a poet cannot write something. It is true. If you don't have talent, you cannot actually stay. Imagine Eliot was bringing in a lot of. I'm going back to the same images from the wasteland because you might have studied that. Imagine that you are bringing a lot of quotations, just like quotations, without any complexity in it. Or if I want to write an poem like a wasteland, I go back, bring in a lot of quotations. Okay, from Homer, this quotation is very good. I just take, and then suddenly from other person, Eliot, or from Dante, I'm taking another quotation, or from the myth, I am taking two or three quotations, and then they're putting together. It doesn't make any sense. One sir says this example: a train comes, a train goes. So many people there occurred an accident. So many people died. Now that doesn't make a great poet, a great work of art, because there is no complexity in it. You can say that it is an existential poem. A train comes, we don't know where to it goes, from where it started to where it goes. It's just like a wind. But unless there is a complexity, unless you have emotions, unless you have personal sufferings, that's where the poet says that you are just like a vessel, you are a medium into which a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings are grabbed from the outside world as materials and put together in the vessel, and you synthesize it under the pressure. You are doing it, and without a talent you cannot do it. You are taking the images, you have the help of the tradition, you have the help of the historical sense, you have a group of people who did that before you. You may not study all those things. Like, it's difficult for us to understand because mm, for the Eastern tradition, one of the critic from Malayalam, he's like KPFN says that tradition come to you automatically because you are born into the tradition. But for the English, T.S. Eliot says you need a great labor to understand the tradition. You need to study it, not like we people. We are born into a culture. We have been practicing it for a long time. But for the English, the culture has been differing every now and then. They have to put in a great labor to understand what has been written from Homer till the date. And if you know how that has been formed, there is a talent in you too. make it into a new form. Like without that, okay, it's easy. You have a lot of imagination, and then you pull in a image of the horse and the image of the eagle, and then the wings are attached to the horse. You can create a unicorn out of that. It's just the mixture. Only if you have the talent, you can make a unicorn out of it. A story behind it. It's as simple as that.
Okay, this is the next question. Lois.
Yeah. There's a great rush today to reimagine, even rewrite history. How should we understand such attempts in the light of Eliot's understanding of relationship between the past and present? Uh, I'm not sure whether I can answer it very good, but then rewriting history, it's like more rereading history. That is the need of the hour. Because every emotion has to look back again and again to understand how it belongs to you today. You read Shakespeare not to understand how Shakespeare meant to the Elizabethan age. You read Shakespeare to know what it means to you today, right? So, uh, if you are actually going back history, all those fictions that rewrite history is trying to understand history from a different point of view. I don't think that is what Eliot is trying to say here. When you rewrite history of colonial period from the perspective of the colonial, the colonies, you have a different history. You have a lot of different histories, right? You need to reread or rewrite history because history is just one perspective. You need to know the different viewpoints. That is historical fact, and the historical sense is nowhere related to historical fact. So I don't think Eliot's understanding of the past and present has something to do with this history, rewriting history. Yeah, I'll check with that question again if possible.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So
How do you identify Eliot as a modern poet, as Matthew Arnold talked of touchstone theory? Isn't the fact that Arnold is modern at best than that of the position of Eliot in this case? Um, yeah. Mm, Matthew Arnold's touched on theory. In fact, criticism itself is touched on. Criticism, the word critique, curios means touched on. You are comparing it. But Matthew Arnold's comparison, the touched on method, is to take a poem, a line, and to touched on or to match it with the any other classical writer and to find whether it could create the same emotion. Eliot actually didn't touch on this touched on theory because they were almost living together or in the same age. Eliot was in fact attacking the romantic theories who said that it is the expression of the personality because Eliot said that it is not the expression of personality, it is an escape from the personality. So the Eliot's space in modern poet is entirely different. He creates, uh, he's part of actually new criticism, if you understand him more clearly. He's part of the new criticism, Ezra Pound and all those people. Now, when it comes to new criticism, uh, they don't go for the background of the poem. They don't compare the poem to find whether this poem is best or that poem is bad. They just try to see whether it could create some artistic emotion in you. And there's one more theory of Eliot that is called the objective correlative, where this idea that the emotion which Eliot is trying to say is correlated with any object in the work of art. So if that object is not able to create that emotion, that work of art is actually failed. That's why he says that Hamlet is a failure, because Hamlet cannot reproduce the same emotion which the Hamlet went through, uh, which the Hamlet has been through, because he only tries to say it through his words. There is no object correlated. When you are going through certain rush of emotion, and if there is a rain outside, you say that it's correlated to that. It is almost a similar. There's a thunder and a rain and lightning, a furious situation outside. It says that the person inside, that the character is going through such big emotion, and the reader can easily connect to it. That has nowhere related to its touchstone theory propagated by Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold says that you go back to the classical writer, take a line, take the new work of art, then compare it and say whether they can produce a similar emotion. So I guess Eliot belongs to more of the new critical areas of modern poet. Will this be the last one?
This is the last question.
Thank you. How does Eliot reconsider emotion
Yeah.
reflected in a tranquility in a romantic ethos of good poetry? I should say, I should quote the sentence from his own essay. Why I'm saying this. His essay, Traditional Individual Talents, to the last part, it says, consequently, we must believe that, I quote, emotion recollected in tranquility is an inexact formula. It is not the right formula. For it is neither emotion, nor recollection, nor tranquility. I'm not distorting the meaning, nor tranquility. It is the concentration, a new thing resulting from the concentration of a very great number of experience to which the practical and the active person, which would not seem to experience at all. So he says that romantics go around, romantics get some feelings. That's what you see in Wordsworth in poem. He goes for a walk, he sees a daffodil, he sees an old man. There is some kind of emotion, and then he comes back. He keeps recollecting it, and then on one sudden rush, he start writing it. He's expressing his personality. Now, that is not complex for Eliot. He says that I go around, I get a lot of materials, a lot of feelings and emotions, and I put them together, different materials. I put them together, different emotions, just like sulfur dioxide and oxygen. And then I synthesize them. I get a new work of art. It can be a new emotion. It can be an emotion that has never been felt. It can be an emotion that has nowhere related to be. So something that is not recollected is tranquility is not what is meant as a work of art. That is not what is needed, because a work of art needs to be complex, and in that it should be in concentration. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lois. It was an excellent question after your very lucid talk. And I thank you very much for coming, accepting our invitation, and delivering such a beautiful
Thank
talk.
you
Thank
for giving me such an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, with your permission, may I invite our next speaker?
Sure, sure. Yes,
Okay.
Dr.
Okay.
Hardik. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will request my colleague Mohammad Safi Danis to introduce the new speaker, Dr. Hardik Udeshi. Over to you, Safi.
Thank you, Anindya. It gives me great pleasure to invite the next speaker to these lecture series. Dr. Hardik Udeshi was born and brought up in Gondal, a town situated near Rajkot. He has completed his primary and secondary schooling from Gondal town. He completed his Bachelor's of Art in English from Christ College, Rajkot, For his university education for masters, he joined Department of English and Comparative Literary Studies, Saurashtra University, Rajkot. For further education, he has completed his MPhil from the same in language studies. The topic for his MPhil dissertation was teaching diphthongs to UG level students of Saurashtra. He is awarded the doctorate in philosophy from Saurashtra University, working on the topic in literature. His topic for research was tribal concerns in selected Bengali, Odia, Malayalam, and Gujarati novels in English, and ethnographic reading. Dr. Hardik Udeshi started his career with Station E-Language Lab in Rajkot in 2012. He trained and made a student competent in speaking English until 2016. Dr. Udeshi worked for Christ Polytechnic Institute for a year in 2012 as an ad hoc lecturer. From 2013, Dr. Udeshi is working with Christ College Rajkot as an assistant professor, where he is teaching art, science, and commerce students. He has researched various topics and presented papers in national and international conferences. Apart from teaching, he has trained various corporate people in public speaking and conducted workshops for group discussion and interview skills. So once again, it gives me great pleasure to have Dr. Hardik Udeshi with us today. He would be speaking on problems and solutions in speaking English language in India. Now that is a topic that I am sure that many of us, and I suppose most of our students, would be deeply interested in. That was a little bit of a hesitant introduction. I hope if I made any mistakes over there, you would correct me. But you are very welcome, and it's over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Shafi Dennis, for that particular short introduction being given by you of mine. But yes, so on the very onset, I would like to thank KMK College Jamui, especially the Department of English and English Literature Briefs. I also thank Dr. Chagru Prasad, who is the principal of the college, and a special thanks to my friend Dr. Arinda Poli and his teammate, Shafi Dennis, for organizing these lectures for these young minds who are just getting trained in this during hard times of pandemics. I am really thankful to Dr. Onindo because of his invitation. I'm here right now to deliver a talk on problems and solutions in speaking English language in India. I know at the very beginning, if I say that India doesn't have a specific language, specifically when we go with English. We say that it has been Indianized English, right? So when we say Indianized English, the very first point that gets into our mind is our mother tongue influence. That is what we say MTI. Probably we all of us have mother tongue influence because the atmosphere in which we learn language, it is the point where it influences our second language, right? But let me put forward a question in front of you, stating that imagine you are living in a nation where you don't know any language. I think it would have been really difficult for every one of us to live in that life. Yes, I have done my research on tribal literature also. But taking that into consideration, you would say that, sir, sign language was one amongst that where people were learning and getting the things. But that was actually being constrained to a specific group. But today, if I say that if you don't know, if you are unable to seek a language or speak a language, specifically particular language, And I think there will be many problems into your life. There will be a walk being there into your life because the language gives you everything. Today, even though you want to earn your bread and butter, at least you need to communicate because communication plays an important role in everyone's life. And for that communication, you need particularly a language. But when I was going through the studies, when I was doing my research, Jay Walker on TED Talks, he states that the developing nations are pulling the language, specifically English language, towards them. Surprisingly, dear friends, till 2012, sorry, 2010, it was India who was the first nation to have more English speakers. But then since 2011 onwards, it is China which is the where majority people are speaking English language. My dear friends, it is China which is leading to speak in English language where Britain is not there. Second is India, where most of the people are speaking English language. Now what happens that when you start learning a language, at that point of time, you are pulling that language towards you, towards your aura, right? Now, when you're pulling your language, when you are pulling, I would say L2, that is the second language, where we have our first language, that is our regional language, or the language in which we are born and brought up, right? Now, in India, the regional language, that is language one, that is first language of yours, is putting all your pressure onto your language two, that is your second language, specifically English language. To give you some data, dear friends, in India, according to Indian census data, most of the people are using English language as the second language, but the first language is the first and the foremost is Hindi. There are 422 million people in India who are speaking Hindi language across India. Then the second language where my friend is located is Bengali. It is 83 million people are speaking Bengali language in India. Then comes Telugu with 75 million people. Then comes Marathi with 71 million. Then comes Tamil with 60 million. Then it's Urdu with 51 million people. Then it is my mother tongue, that is Gujarati with 46 million people. And then it comes Punjabi with 29 million people across India. I would say that this was according to the census of 2011 onwards. Okay, it may change in the next year, that is in 2021, with the new census. When it gets into, will come out with the new number of people speaking various languages. Now, why people are not having a unique language unlike we have England? Now, I would specifically say England, I don't say Britain. Okay, I would come to that point in short while. But dear friends, it is the linguistic lines that is been there. You know, till 1960, it was Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Rajasthan which were clubbed together, and that was a state. Now, mostly people in Rajasthan, they were speaking Rajasthani language, the regional language over there. When it comes to Maharashtra, it went into Marathi language. When it came into Gujarat, it was Gujarati language. But dear friends, if we see that, I was reading an article, it was a kind of a civil war going on, that specifically Mumbai should have gone to Gujarat rather than going to Maharashtra. But the reason was that though there were more people speaking in Gujarati language in Maharashtra, but the other part of Maharashtra there were more people who were speaking Marathi language. It was only the northern part of Maharashtra, sorry, Mumbai, which was speaking Gujarati language did not get into Gujarat over there. And the same thing happens when you divide the lines of states with that particular language. Now, the second question arises, why it is been divided with their languages? Dear friends, there are many influential factors that makes up English as a language or specifically a regional language towards getting into that particular stage. Specifically, the history of literature. Right? Now, the history of literature makes that particular state rich. Secondly, it's art. The art of particular state is being in through such a manner that it gives you the authenticity of that particular language. For example, uh, mostly in Bengal or in Orissa, if we say that, many people are into tribes. Now they have their particular language, right? Now, when they have that particular language, it is the small group that is understanding the particular language. Does that mean that the other people will not be able to follow the language? No. For few portions, they'll be able to get to the language, right? Secondly, the dance form. We know that Navratri, I would give you an example of Navratri over here. In Western India, that is in Gujarat, we have Garba as well as Navratri, the puja happens, right? But we have our particular dance form associated with it, that is Garba. Whereas we take into East India, specifically West Bengal, you have Durga Puja, you do have your particular dance form associated with it. Right? So two different things, having two different cultures, two different dance forms, but still you have those 9 days particularly getting into. Then we have political influence. If we get into the Great Britain, uh, if we get into the Great Britain, then it so happens that the Britain over there gets into specifically with various languages. Now, when it gets into the various languages, at that point of time, that particular language is spoken by various and majoritively the people. Now, the question arises then, why France, Spain get their own particular language? Now, the question is that the France and Spain have their own particular language to get into whatever is there as their first language. But they are developed nations, my dear friends. Similarly, India is not having their one language, though Hindi is our national language. But the problem is that when Hindi is our national language, though we have particularly our own regional languages. If I take examples of, let's say, Gujarat, we do have various dialects. Now, these dialects, directly influence the second language. Now I'm coming gradually towards our English language students. When we start speaking English language, as I stated earlier, our English language also gets influenced by our regional language. When that regional language is there, that is practically influencing our second language is just because the way, the atmosphere in which we are learning our first language directly influences the second language. Right? Now, I would get into the major differences that we have while speaking in English language, specifically the consonants and vowels. I am not going to get into the deeper way of phoneme and phonology and the language in general, just because you had the first session of language, phoneme and phonology into it. If we take examples of Indian language, that is specifically English, there is one phoneme that is that is short that is corresponding with the British RP, that is received pronunciation of as in cup, as in bird, and Kent. Okay, Kent, as we say. Now, what happens for these three phonemes, that is as in cup, as in bird, and as in Kent, we replace the same thing with corresponding the phoneme as in Kent. Cup. For example, when I say Gujaratis speak, it is cup. Whereas you don't have k, they have the first phoneme as it k. Secondly, Indian English has one phoneme that is short O, corresponding to British received pronunciation for two things, that is short O as in hot and long O as in boot. Sorry, boat. Okay. Now, what happens that when you are having long O, specifically Indians, they curve themselves into the connected speech and they use short O rather than long O. Okay. Short O as in long O that we have. Thirdly, diphthongs have been very crucial things for almost every Indians. Because into a regional language, as we say, we do not have many things to get into. That is, the diphthongs are not there into a regional language, and therefore, from diphthongs, we move into monophthongs. For example, ew as in no, no, we usually say no, but it's actually no. Now, what happens when you are talking to a British people or person, somebody having good idea about English language? At that point of time, what happens is that when you say, "Do you want a cup of coffee?" and you reply, "No," then the person would be confused. The person would say, "Do you mean to say K-N-O-W? Or do you mean to say N-O?" Now what happens when you say N-O, then he would or she would correct you, would say that it is not no, it is no. Right? And that's where the changes happens from diphthongs to monophthongs. And there are a list of things getting into when you go into diphthongs and monophthongs. Nextly, we know that there are strong vowels and there are weak vowels. Right? In British RP, when we have weak vowels, that is e, and u, are unaccentuated. Okay. For example, pin. It is per which is accentuated, where you don't have short e that is accentuated. Now, Englishers, when they are into India, or rather I would say Indian English, you do not have accentuated English. And we know that when we speak accentuated English, people around us specifically will have problem with our English. And then they will say that you are speaking English language, which is actually not our English language, and come down to our English language where we can understand it. Now, these are the differences which have been given by R.K. Bansal, and he has edited with that, Bansal and Harishton in 1998's textbook that they have edited. Now, if I go into the Rajkot's Indian English that is being stated, we know that it is Britain, that is England, America, and Australia who are speaking, we consider as they're speaking the correct English. But the question arises that what about the other nations? Aren't they speaking English language then? We do speak English language, friends. But what happens, as I stated earlier, the regional language is influencing our language. Now, you say that, sir, then what about the people who are started learning English language as the beginners? That I'm going to come up with when you are facing problem as the non-native speakers. But the inner circle is of Rajkot is of England, Britain, England, America, and Australia. Then there is an outer circle where in those countries there are majoritively English speakers. For example, if you say Canada, then if you say Ireland, then if you say even now gradually it is Poland, okay, and those developing nations. But then there is a third circle where the developing nations are getting into. Okay, there where India is one amongst them. Okay, now these developing nations, as I told you earlier, they are pulling the language towards them because of the opportunities that they see into that. Right? Now, when you look forward for the opportunities, you want to learn second language. Now, when you start learning the second language, friends, okay, there you face or then you start facing the problems. Right? Now, let me come towards the problems of or the problems faced by non-native speakers, that is NNS. The first and the foremost problem by a speaker that is you are unable to express clearly your ideas due to poor vocabulary. When you are having poor vocabulary, at that point of time, you are unable to express your ideas. Now, obviously, your teacher would not tell you at the beginning when you are start speaking English language. For example, I never tell my students to speak or a clear language, even though they are the speakers who have started learning English language. These people, I would say that to the student that though you do not know how to express, start speaking the language even though with the broken language that you know. Because that is the first thing that we usually get to know about the students, that at what level they can speak English language, so that it would be easier for us to groom them into the coming future or into the future. Now, the main problem that people say that, sir, we do not have proper vocabulary. It is not out of the world or it is not out of your mother's womb that suddenly you take birth out of your mother's womb and then you will say that, thank you, mom, you have given me the birth. Not at all. You need to train yourself to learn vocabulary. Right? That I would come into the solution that we get into. Secondly, we have this psychological problem as being our reputation at stake while speaking, that people would laugh at. There is nothing that people would laugh at. Let me tell you, you are wearing the same shoes as what they are wearing because you are people having the same capabilities as they have. I would say that you become shameless while you started speaking your English language. Though you speak broken language, you would understand it in a better manner. Now, when you start understanding it in the better manner, gradually your ego clash, your confidence level, your ego clash would reduce and confidence level will be rising. That's what my third point is. That we become nervous, right? Most of us become nervous while speaking English language. Now, the nervousness is just because we are not getting the atmosphere to speak English language wherever we are. For example, it usually happens with us that when we have students of southern India, or specifically I would say Kerala, when they are in front of us or when they are talking to each other, they would talk into their mother tongue rather than speaking into a common language where we can understand. I think most of us would be facing the same problem that we do not understand the language. But mind you, students, you can understand the portion of that particular thing if you pay attention to them. Now, the nervousness that you have, it is just because you do not listen it carefully. You should start learning the language, or the first and the foremost thing is that we should start learning a new language by listening it. Now, when you start listening it, your nervousness will gradually diminish. Now, students usually get nervous is just because they are not knowing that particular language, how to start with, and specifically the sentence structure. Now, the sentence structure that is been there, you would not understand by your own selves, right? There, you need proper guidance. This is one of the problems that I have seen amongst the students when they are learning second language, that they are into the situation where they are not guided properly. When they are not guided properly, at, at that point of time, they would speak any way they want. And therefore, when they come towards or in front of an expert or the person who knows the language properly, there he or she would face the problems that they have not been given the guidance properly. Now, in India, students, specifically when you are into a regional school or the state board school, English language comes to you at the very later age that we can say that, right? Now, when you get into that later stage, obviously, the next problem that you're going to face is that poor grammar. The problem with poor grammar is that what I have seen with the students and what I was doing the research, what do they do is that they associate their language, that is regional language grammar, with their second language. Now, this is the most difficult problem that we are facing, students. The difficult problem that we are facing is just because We are associating our L1, that is language 1 grammar, with our language 2 grammar, which is not going to be the same maturatively. So what happens when you start learning the second language, dear friends? You should not correlate your language 1 grammar to your language 2 grammar. Okay, and most of the Indian states, if I say that, the students of English language learner, they correlate their first language to the second language grammar. Okay, then we have fear of fluency. Let me tell you, friends, nobody get or nobody is so fluent until and unless you practice it. Though I am a student of English language, at that point of time, or I was a student of English schools, or I would say convent schools, it took me a lot of time to get fluent. The reason behind that is I was not getting not proper atmosphere for getting fluent. Now I would come into the solutions to guide you about it, that how to get fluent. Okay. The next problem, as I stated earlier, also that is the attitude towards learning second language. I was doing the research and I found that most of the students' attitude is such that they do not want to learn second language for opportunities. They want to just learn the language to clear the first step for getting employed. Now, this is very difficult, dear friends. When this is very difficult to you, that just to clear your first step, you are learning second language, then I would say that please do not learn that language. Okay. Uh, I know few people in northern India. When I question them that why do you learn second language as your English language, or second language as your English language, they stated that, dear Hardik, it is just because it is in trend. Now, does it mean that it is in trend you are starting learning language? No. You should not learn English language just to get into the trend, but you must get into the depth of the language so that your fluency, your idea about that language becomes clear. Right? So these are the majority, the more, what I can say, the problems faced by speakers of language when they take language 2 as an English language into it. Now I would come towards solutions, that what you can do. Okay, when you start learning your English language, I would rather say that get the formal language or formal knowledge about that language, specifically pronunciation. Every state has their own specific pronunciation for English. For example, I have noticed specifically the eastern states. No offenses with eastern states, but yes, I have come across that most of the eastern states in India, they do not have the sound called V sound, as in van, V-A-N, van. Okay, they usually substitute the sound B with B, that is bilabial sound, rather than labiodental sound. They substitute the language or the specific phone with B. So I have come across that many a times when I have when I am speaking to various people in eastern states, rather than they would say very, they would say very. And there are n number of things getting into when you get across to that particular thing. Okay. Now, what happens when you're not taught pronunciation particularly into your or by your language teacher? You tend to take the pronunciation that you hear. Now, I would request you that whenever you come across a particular pronunciation, check with the British pronunciation. I do not want to say that you go towards that intelligibility, but for the standardizing the pronunciation, please check that. Okay. Then the second solution, I would say that if you're coming across to the new words, start using your new words into your day-to-day communication. With people usually fail to use that word specifically into their day-to-day communication. And that is the main reason, friends. We are lagging or we lack the proper vocabulary. And when you lack proper vocabulary, it is difficult for you to speak to it. Okay. Thirdly, I would rather say that if you're alone, if you do not have an atmosphere where you can learn English language or speak English language, we are into the technological world where you can record your own selves and send that recording to an expert. Seek their guidance. I would rather say that do this practically. It would improve your English language, my friends. Initially, you may start recording by reading either a newspaper or a journal or a short story or something that is very brief. Send it to the expert, seek their advices and see what they say. Get that saying or get that kind of knowledge from that, and wherever necessary, change your pronunciation, change your way of speaking, specifically with punctuation mark also. Then your attitude towards learning English language should be optimistic. Many of us, dear friends, what do is that we do not become optimistic with our language or second language we learn. We give away our all efforts of learning that particular language in between, specifically to the people who have just started learning English language. My dear students, as in my introduction, it is stated that I have made competent people to speak English language. The first and the foremost thing, I used to tell them that be optimistic, be hopeful that you will learn language. And telling you into the sense of things, dear friends, that I have even trained a lady who was into her 50s and she was not knowing even A of English language, but within a span of time, she could easily read, write, and speak English language. That is the normal language, specifically with the sentence structure and everything, very clearly, because she was hopeful for getting the language, right? And to learn that language. She was very optimistic learning the language. And today she is in Australia doing very well with the language. That is the reason, dear friends, you need to be very optimistic. The last solution I would rather give to the teachers, that dear teachers, you should be aware about the psychological difficulties about a student facing the language. Specifically, what happened that the students who would be facing the language, that they would be facing the language into the context, we would say that with the pronunciation, with the grammatical structure, uh, and with everything that is been there with their psychology. The learners specifically are facing problems with two things, dear friends, or rather, dear teachers. One is pronunciation and the sentence construction. If they are clear with these two things, I would rather say that they would be potential enough to speak second language, that is English language, into some time very fluently. And yes, dear teachers, you should get to know with their psychology. Okay, towards the end, into the conclusion, I would say that it is not too difficult to learn second language if you have good expert with you, if you are optimistic about learning the language, and if you practice it whenever you want to learn that language. I think these three things, if you have, I'm sure that you'll be easier to learn, or it will be easier for you to learn this language, that is specifically English language, in short period of time. Okay, with this, I would end up my session and welcome your questions in front of me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Udeshi, for your excellent lecture about the problems and what solutions can be implemented to correct those problems.
Yes.
Your lecture touched upon some very important issues. One of the things
Sorry?
I
Sorry,
was
I couldn't
saying
get that.
your lecture touched upon some very important issues that
Yes.
we keep hearing about around this entire issue of acquiring second language in general and English in
Yes.
particular. Um, one
Yes.
of the things that we often hear is that perhaps we should not pay too much attention to pronunciation because different communities tend to mold language in their own direction, which you, of course, touched upon and talked about at length as to how native pronunciation interferes with English pronunciation and how grammar get extrapolated. And I have always found this entire uh, issue a little bit problematic in the sense that uh, if we really indigenize English uh, to our native language equivalent, we might get to a point where we would again be unable to understand each other, even though we would be speaking English. So there is a great need to balance um, a certain relaxation with a certain attention to pronunciation and to correct grammar and to formal English, as you have pointed out.
Yes,
So thank you.
I would add
Yes,
on a
please.
point over here, dear Safe. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
No, please go ahead.
If we, as you stated that if we will start speaking English as into our mother tongue influence getting into our English language, then I would say that even English language would be equivalently as many as we have our languages in India. English, Gujlish, Benglish, Manglish, then there would be many languages. That's why I stated that whenever you want to learn English language, then you listen to specific pronunciations. Please listen a particular pronunciation where everyone can get to it. Okay, and we cannot give relaxation into the grammar. I'm so sorry because those grammarians have get into. Okay, yes, over to you, Dia.
Yeah, that was exactly how I understood your point, and
Yes,
and that was exactly what I was saying. That yes, we need to pay attention to formal English,
yes,
even
exactly.
as we, of course, make it a little bit our own, in some sense. The second issue that
Yes,
I think you touched upon was about how do we get about acquiring English, and
yes,
you mentioned that people should record themselves and send it to an expert so that
yes,
uh, their English could be corrected. And I really
yes,
appreciate that, because there is another debate regarding grammar versus immersion. That is to say, whether
yes,
you acquired language by immersing yourself into it, or more by a formal process of learning the grammar and the formal structure of the language.
yes,
Um,
yes.
so an excellent lecture, and I
Thank you
think
very much.
we have enough time to take a few questions. You are up for a few questions?
Yes, definitely. I'm waiting for
Yes.
it.
Yeah. Let's see what questions we have got.
Yes. How does the interpersonal communication come into play, work from home, confinement in pandemic time? Dear Demetrius Petra, yes, I was rather expecting this question while we are into this particular thing. See, Debashis, this pandemics have made us to get into the technology now, right? As you all know that the communication gets into verbal and non-verbal, specifically oral and written. It is better to talk to the person right now into pandemics with video conferencing, okay, rather than texting them, or I would say writing them an email. Because today, people during this pandemics need to talk to each other formally. Right. So it would be better, I would say that rather writing them to them on the messages or on the emails, it is better to talk to them via phone calls, or let's say via video conferences. So I think work from home, yes, is definitely is going to get onto your psyche, but to me, whatever I have come across or the way we are dealing up with right now, I would rather say that talk to the people on the phones and on video conferences so that your interpersonal communication gets intact. Okay, I think I have answered to your question over there.
Okay. Thank you. Can we have the second question, please? I Yeah.
Yes, there is some English literature brief questions me as non-native speakers of English language. How would you envision the role of instructors or faculty members in facilitating speaking skills through regular teaching learning activities? There you are into my court. The ball is in my court now. Okay. As an English instructor, I would rather say that teachers have major role shaping the learner's language. But as the non-native speakers of English language, even though the instructors have to be prepared for whatever comes into their court. The reason behind that is majoritively, as I would say that the teachers who are teaching English language specifically into the states, they teach English language into dual way. That is, they would rather get into their regional language for teaching English. I would rather say to the teachers and the instructors, please do not do this. Because doing this will not give or will not boost the confidence of the learners, but to boost the confidence of learners, bring out the activities where the learner will learn the second language in a very lucid manner. For example, if I teach English language, the first and the foremost thing, I give an activity to my learners on the very first or the second day after giving them the orientation. I would rather give them the activity of introducing themselves. Simple words I will give them. And then they will construct those words into sentence fragmentations and sentences, and then they would give me the reply back. So I would say that to the non-native speakers of English language, to the English literature briefs, the role of faculty is very important and as well as crucial, because they look forward to you to learn second language, right? And when you bring the activity into the classroom, and at that point of time, they will be more eager to learn. So to balance both, we as the facilitators, dear friends, we need to be extremely careful what do we give them. Okay, I think I am clearly thinking, okay. There's Spark Education asking me whether study of English grammar would be preferred for effective communication, or should one try to focus more on listening and practicing speaking in English? Being an instructor, being a trainer, I have always told people to take latter first, then to the first one. I would always say to the people, to the students, that you listen and then practice. Because most of the times, what happens, specifically in every school of India, majoritively, they start teaching second language with their writing. Let me tell you, this will not help them out. And grammar comes in writing. Okay. For teaching them the second language, I would rather say that tell them to listen the basics of English initially, then practice it. I would even say that to my learners, practice it when you are alone, stand in front of the mirror and start speaking English language, because there nobody is there to listen to you. You yourself, you're going to listen yourselves, and many times you will catch your own errors. So here I would say that listening and practicing would be better for the speakers or to the learners who are learning second language as English language. Yes.
Yes, we have been teaching English to the students here in Bihar, and we've always faced this problem that even people who get
Yes.
excellent marks in their board exams, and
Yes.
they must have written something
Yes.
something good enough to get those marks, and yet they are unable to
Yes.
speak the language properly.
See,
So
that's what I stated, dear friend Safe. I'm sorry to interrupt you again. That the attitude towards learning the language, their attitude is such that for clearing the exam, they want to learn the language. To the learners, I would say that please have an optimistic attitude for learning this language. Okay, over to you, Safe.
yes, that was exactly what I was saying. Do we have any more
Yes.
questions? Let's see if we have any more questions. Otherwise, I think we might. No, we don't have any more questions. So with that, I think we can wrap up the lecture. Thank you once again, Dr. Udeshi. It has been very fun, a very interactive session. Thank you very much. I think I'll take this opportunity to introduce, to just say a few words about the speakers and the topics that we would be having for Monday. Uh, uh, on Monday, we have Dr. Ashish Priya, his assistant professor at TNB College, Tilka Manjhi University, Bhagalpur, and he would be speaking about Jacques Derrida as a critic. Now that would be fun, isn't it? And then we have the second speaker is Dr. Anamika Purohit. She is assistant professor at Jai Hind College. Um, uh, Autonomous University of Mumbai, and she would be speaking on a comparative analysis of selected poems of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning. So we have two excellent lectures to look forward to on Monday. And with that, we will close today's session. Please, everybody, keep safe. Have a good day, and goodbye from us over here.
Thank you very much for inviting me also. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anindra, for that.